Hello everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to the MuseScore Café. This is my regular series on Wednesdays where we talk about some aspect of creating music using MuseScore. And usually I have a particular topic we're going to talk about, although we also have special sessions, hard to say, I'll have Ask Me Anything session next week. And then we also do like a score session where I just enter a score and we get to see everything that's involved in that. Today's topic is about piano, and it's, kind of a continuation of last week when we were talking about a particular piano vocal guitar score where I was looking at a number of things: the fretboard diagrams, chord symbols, vocal part, lyrics, and piano. But I want to focus more on just the piano today, and not on that score specifically, but other things that come up in entering piano music. And there's still my ulterior motive of connecting this to the project we're working on in Musicianship Skills, which is the project involving creating some PVG sheet music, piano, vocal, guitar sheet music, for my brother Mike's song Rise Up and Shine. So we'll be using that as an example but I want to talk about other things. So not hearing the background music, that is good to know. I was just testing that, and what did I do to break it then? That's what I'm wondering. So here's the thing. I was just testing it because they changed a little bit about how the music is transmitted. I'm still working on optimizing the quality. So if it's a little sketchy, bear with it. The playback isn't going to be too important for what we're doing today, and hopefully I'll have things going well tomorrow. So, but yeah, when I tested it, I could hear it. I think the quality wasn't as good as usual, and maybe there were some cutting in and cutting out. All right, so the first thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about piano music and some of the things that we're going to be looking at, some of the sort of pitfalls of entering piano music. And as opposed to last week, where we had a fixed score, right? There was a published score, and I was just copying the piano part from it, not making decisions, really, just trying to enter things. I want to talk a little bit more today about the decision-making process of creating your own piano part and choosing things for readability, notating things in such a way that they're going to be easier to read, and maybe playability also, although anyhow, we're just going to be talking a little more broadly about piano music. So that said, let's take a look at this particular piano part here, right? This is the MuseScore Café. Actually, let's just look at just the piano part here. So when we look at the MuseScore Café theme music, you can see that I have it written out here in full, with two staves and chord symbols above and below. Well, that's a common thing to do in a jazz pop type setting, where you would use chord symbols to give the pianist some freedom to do his own thing, but also maybe write out a sample part. And that's really what this is. So if I were to play this in a band, that's me, not MuseScore, right? I'll share the screen and show you my keys when that becomes relevant. I play that. I would probably play that pretty much as written for a while. And then I would get tired of it, especially during the vamp section, when it's just like repeating over and over again while I talk. If it were me doing that, I'd want to fiddle around a little bit. I'd want to have some freedom. So one of the things that can happen in piano music, if it's in a pop, rock, jazz kind of context, is we might have chord symbols. And you also might have it written with only the chord symbols. You might not have anything written out for it at all, or you might have just indications of the rhythms. There's all sorts of things that might happen, but I'm going to be focusing today on the actual notation, so the kinds of things that we see here. So let's just dive in a little bit deeper and talk about some of what's going on here. we do have chords, right? We have two staves. The right hand, the top staff is normally for the right hand, bottom staff normally for the left hand, and there's exceptions. Places where the left hand might play something in the top staff, right hand might play something in the bottom. But normally that's how we're going to arrange things. And in this case, I have just full chords in each hand. I have a 3-note chord in the right hand, 2-note in the left hand. And I don't think this particular piece does anything other than that. It's always just 3-note chords in right hand, 2-note chords in left hand. And yet there's tons of piano music that does much more complicated things. So for instance, I am going to just load up another piece that I'll actually load up Reunion, because it was, many of you have seen that piece before. It was the old demo score for MuseScore 1 point something or other, 1.2, I think is what I wrote it for. And Reunion was the demo score that I created for MuseScore like over 10 years ago. And I created it specifically to show off a lot of the things that MuseScore could do. And it remains a good example of things. So let's take a look at some of what's going on in this score. And one of the reasons I'm giving you this overview is, I want to help you. So if you see something in here and you're like, how do I do that thing? Then let's make sure we talk about it. I mean, I definitely know some things that I want to talk about, but if there's other things, feel free to ask. So, question about the B-flat 7 and the written music describing a B-flat 13. All right, excellent question. So let's come back and look at this. The chord symbol says B-flat 7, but the voicing that I've actually written out has a 13th. So there's a thing you have to understand about chord symbols, especially in a jazz context, although not exclusively. They're guides. They're not prescriptive. They're not meant to tell you exactly what to play. They are meant to define the basic function of the harmony and any particular relevant colorations that are required. But they're never meant to mean you must only play these notes. Certainly not in a jazz context. That's part of the sound. Part of what happens in jazz is each player adding their own colorations and so forth. So just because I happen to voice it with a 13th doesn't mean I would have to notate it B-flat 13. Any jazz pianist would know they are welcome to add that 13th in there, whether or not it's called for in the chord symbol. They might add a 13th, or they might choose to play it with a 9th instead. They might play it like this with this 9th in here, or they might put them both in. There's lots of different ways of voicing any given chord symbol that could include adding 9ths, could include adding 13ths, and any jazz pianist or guitar player or any chordal instrument player would understand that and add those themselves. So typically we only write in extensions and alterations on chord symbols when they aren't optional. Like for instance, the thing that happens in this part here, that sound there, what's going on there is that G7 here, I wouldn't want that played unaltered. No, I wouldn't want anyone playing that not to add some alterations to that chord. Now, in point of fact, what I wrote here, G7 sharp 9, if I look at this, I didn't actually even write in a sharp 9. I've got a flat 13, a flat 9, and a flat 5. So actually the voicing that I chose to play there is not consistent with my chord symbol in a way. I would probably second guess myself on that at this point and say, you know what? I feel like the flat 5 is more important there. So, and by the way, Michael, I didn't see that was you asking that. So obviously you are familiar more with jazz. I didn't know who was actually asking that question. But yeah, pianists definitely will feel free to do things. So add alterations and extensions. So here, probably I shouldn't have called that G7 sharp 9. I think originally that would be G7 sharp 9 more literally. And what I play is this more complicated thing. So I should probably just rewrite that as G7 alt or something, probably. But this next part here, that sharp 9 is quite important to that C7. Now, could I have called this B9 and then hoped that someone would actually come up with that same B9 voicing? Yeah, I could have. But just because I call it B9 doesn't mean someone's actually going to play that ninth, nor does it mean they're going to put it on top. So here's the other thing. When you're using chord symbols, if you really want a particular voicing or a particular note on top of that voicing, then yeah, you're going to have to notate that. You're not going to be able to write a chord symbol and expect someone to provide that note in their voicing the way you want. So often there's this balancing act that we do between writing out voicings and writing chord symbols. And then the other thing to remember is when someone's improvising over these chord symbols, then we want to give them the right palette of notes to choose from. And there's this whole association between chord symbols and scales to use there. So there you go. So Dave is pointing out that the music may have 2 treble or 2 bass clefs. Absolutely. And that, in fact, happens at various points in Reunion here. So Reunion starts off with, I just played that on the keyboard because I felt like it. I'm capable of playing it more sensitively than that, but I was just demonstrating. It's got a treble clef and a bass clef, but later on in the piece, it does switch to treble clef for the bottom staff also, only for a few notes, right? And that happens there. Does it happen anywhere else in this piece? No, I think this piece mostly sticks to treble and bass. But yeah, if both hands are meant to play up high, well then by all means, then that's what we can do, is have 2 treble clefs. There's no requirement that it be treble and bass clef. That's just most conventional because that's how most music is organized. But notice also, I mentioned before that there might be notes played in one hand that are written in the other staff. And I don't know if I did that in this piece. I got to think about how I would play this and think if there's, I think I actually, organized this in such a way that I do expect the top staff to always be the right hand and the bottom staff always the left hand. But it's important to know when you're writing for piano, everyone's hands are different. We have different size hands and different shape hands. So I've made this observation before, and I'm going to make it again. And I've got my hand held out here. Actually, let me hold it out this way to make it a little more obvious which finger is which, perhaps. Look at the relative size of my hands, and then hold up your own and think about it. In my case, my middle finger is the longest finger, but my ring finger here, 4th finger here with the actual ring on it, is almost as long as my middle finger. My index finger is quite a bit shorter than the ring finger. My pinky is almost as long as the index finger. If you hold up your hand, you might find all of those statements false. I think most people have the middle finger longest, but some people, there's definitely people whose index finger is longer than their ring finger, or at least closer than mine is. And similarly for the relative, some people have pinkies that are nowhere near as close to the length of the index finger as mine is, and so forth. So everyone's hands are shaped differently, which is a consideration when you are writing for a piano. That just because you can play it doesn't mean someone else can, and just because you can't doesn't mean someone else can't, right? So these are all things we think about. So as I look at my piece here, one of the things you can see is sometimes my left hand only has one note at a time, and then there's places where it does split into, two notes there. But there's also places where there's what we call multiple voices, right? There's places here where this measure starts off with some eighth notes, there, and then there's a half note on beat 3, but while that half note is being sustained, there's 2 quarter notes. Well, that's multiple voices, right? And Marla, yeah, absolutely. Harp is another instrument that uses 2 staves and uses both hands. And yeah, so that's everything that I say about piano. Not everything, but a lot of the stuff that I say about piano here will apply equally well to harp. So this thing here where you've got one note sustaining, the C and the B flat sustaining while the F and the E move, that's multiple voices, and that's absolutely a thing in piano music. We see it right off the bat in the first full measure in the right hand also, right? When I've got it highlighted, you can see the blue notes, A, C. Meanwhile, voice 2, the green notes, together. So there's 2 different rhythms happening. There's quarter, 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 and there's quarter, eighth, eighth, quarter, quarter. 2 different rhythms at once, and that involves using multiple voices. So those are some things you expect to see for piano. Also, another thing you expect to see for piano are things like what happens at the end here, this little passage here, where it's basically... And actually, okay, I think I do need to actually flip over to my keyboard so you can see that. And let me take MuseScore and get it to where you can see both MuseScore and my keys, because I think we'll need to do that for at least some of this. Sorry. There we go. All right, so if you look at this here, look at what's going on in MuseScore, and then watch my hands, the way I play it is something like this. My hands are crossing over each other constantly. I play the chord, and then chord, left hand crosses over, right hand crosses over, left hand crosses over, right hand crosses. Actually, right hand crosses under, I guess, is more accurate. Left hand over, right hand under. I don't think about it consciously like that. It's just a crossing motion. And yet you have to kind of derive that for yourself based on this, because the passage crosses between bass clef and treble clef. And if I tried to switch staves every time the hand crossed, it would be hard to read. So it makes more sense to write it in one flowing motion that gradually moves from the bottom to the top staff. And this is called cross staff notation, when you have that sort of thing going on, where there's a single line, with that's beamed together, all these 30-second notes beamed together that move from one staff to another. That's called cross staff notation, and so I can show you that. And yes, 3 staves is not common for piano. It's super common. I mean, organ music traditionally is 3 staves, one for each hand and one for the foot, for the pedals. Piano music isn't done that way very often. But yeah, definitely Romantic era music, Rachmaninoff especially. Rachmaninoff, speaking of hands, had enormous hands. Famously could reach, I think, a 12th. I think he could reach from C to G, something crazy like that he could reach with his hand. It was enormous. And so he wrote things that no other human being really can play. And often it would require 3 staves to sort all out. And then, yeah, every once in a while you'll see someone else do that as well. So yeah, that's absolutely the case. And so yeah, we can talk about how to add a staff temporarily where needed also. All right, so these are some of the things that I want to talk about. So I'm going to get started entering something, and well, let's just go ahead and do it. I'm just going to flip over to an empty score that I've got started here. And let me also get this guy where I can see, because I feel like seeing the keys is useful here. So let me just minimize this window. I want us to be able to see what we're doing here. So here we go. Yeah, all right. Good enough. So I've got my score here, and let's talk about doing some of these things. So for one thing, since there was discussion of the different clefs here, if you've created your score for piano, either by selecting the piano instrument or using the piano template or using the grand staff template, if you decide, hey, I want my piece to start off with 2 bass clefs, great, let's do it. I'm going to select that treble clef, come over to the palettes, and open the clefs palette and click my bass clef. And now I've got 2 bass clefs, and now I can enter notes that way. Okay. So let's also talk about the multiple voice thing. I'm going to enter that exact measure we just saw a little bit ago. Zoom. I'm using the control touch wheel zoom right now to focus in on just that measure there. So it's this line here. It's a G, D, A, G, and then, okay, the B flat and C sustain while the F and E move. So if I want to enter that, I can do that. Let's move down to the bottom staff. And 8th notes, I'll press 4 for that, and then G down an octave, D up an octave, A up an octave, G. And now I have to decide, in this case here, which do I want to be voice 1 and which do I want to be voice 2? Now, normally, that's an easy choice. Normally, when there's multiple voices, like for instance, in that first measure in the right hand, it's a really easy choice here. The top voice is voice 1. The bottom voice is voice 2. That's an easy call most of the time. However, piano music is full of cases like this where the distinction between what's the top and what's the bottom is not so clear, because think about it. I've got B flat above that F, right? I've got B flat above, F in the middle, and then C below. So which is the top voice? Is it B flat because it's the highest note? But wait a minute, C is the lowest note, so maybe that's voice 2. So sometimes it's not just top and bottom that we're going to think about. I want to think about the line. I want to think about the musical line that's being created. Logically, let me play this line. That's how it goes. I would claim that line is that's the musical line. All one phrase. That's all the same voice, logically speaking. The chord that comes in on beat 3, that's the new thing. That's the thing that was like added. This feels like the line. This is what feels like a second part added on top of it. Now, this is a subjective determination. I wrote the piece. I get to make that call. When you write your pieces, you get to make your own calls on that sort of thing. But that's why I did it the way I did, I think, where I called that F there voice 1, and I called the E also voice 1. I called those 2 notes voice 1, the quarter notes voice 1, and I called the half notes voice 2. So let's go ahead to our other score and enter it that way. I'm going to enter voice 1, the F, and that F natural, by the way, we are in the key of F. There's 1 flat in the key signature. This F here is, not needed according to the key signature, but it's present because we just had an F sharp in the previous measure. So this F is a courtesy accidental. Courtesy accidentals, don't think of them as optional. They are the difference between someone playing your piece correctly the first time and someone butchering it, and maybe figuring out their error after hours and hours of practice going, oh crap, I can't believe I missed that accidental, versus sight reading it perfectly. You want to make choices that allow people to sight read perfectly, or at least avoid practicing it wrong longer than necessary. You want to write for success. So I want to get that natural sign in there right off the bat. So I'm going to type equals and then type 5 for quarter, and then F, and then E. So there's the voice 1 part. So now I'm going to control left to go back to the beginning of that measure. And now let's get the voice 2 part in. The voice 2 part has nothing for the first 2 beats, right? There's nothing there. And technically, there's a rest there. Voice 2 is resting for 2 beats and then coming in with that chord on beat 3. So technically speaking, that's what's going on. So I'm going to enter it that way. I'll type 6 for half and then 0. Whoops, I forgot to switch to voice 2, didn't I? Control Alt 2. 6, 0. And now I can type my actual chord there, which is a C and a B flat together. And of course, I never entered my key signature. Let's get the key signature, shall we? Select a measure, come over to the palette, and this time I want the key signatures palette. So let's get that F major key signature in there. And now let's come to that B and lower it a step so it's a B flat. There we go. So this is what that measure would look like if I just entered it straight out. And, it's fine, but that half rest isn't needed. And now here's the thing about piano music and rests in multiple voices. Sometimes those rests are needed. Sometimes they're not. How do you know which is which? My answer for you is, when in doubt, leave the rest there. But I'm not going to just leave it at that. I am going to show you some examples and how you might know the difference. But in general, the extra voice rest, like this half rest to let me know that this voice comes in on that half note comes in on beat 3, and I can tell that because there's a half rest before it. In general, those rests are a good thing. The places where you can get rid of them are the places where the context makes it absolutely clear what's going on. So in this case, it's quite clear because this half note comes in at the same time as a voice 1 note. That half note, the C and B flat chord, comes in at the same time as the F. So therefore, I don't need to have seen the leading rests to understand that that half note came in on beat 3. So I can select that leading rest and press V to make it invisible. And when I do that, you'll see that now the stems automatically fix themselves in voice 1. When before I did that, let me undo it, the stems had flipped up. Because normally voice 1 stems are up, voice 2 down. But in this case, I don't want to see the rest, and so then MuseScore can do what it would normally do as far as calculating stem directions. And in this case, the correct stem direction for those 4/8 notes is stem down, because the lowest note and the highest note are the same distance from the middle line. That's how you calculate that. Whichever note is furthest from the middle line, that determines the stem directions for the whole beamed group. And in the case of a tie, stem down wins. That's how that all works. So, by the way, so I chose to put F and E in voice 1 for musical reasons. I chose to put those quarter notes in voice 1 for musical reasons. But there's actually no particular reason I had to have the stem up for that. Right? I could have gone with stems down, and I feel like, let's just see what happens. I'm going to flip that stem down, and then take the chord in voice 2. Whoops, I pressed V. I meant to press X. X is the shortcut for flipping stems. I totally could have notated it this way. The chord with the stem up. That is, when you have these cases of overlapping voices like this, that F is sort of tucked in between the C and B flat, then, the whole which is the upper, which is the lower kind of goes out the window, and you choose your stem directions based on whatever subjective factors you like. When I look at this right now, I actually like this better. I kind of like this better. Let me look at the other one. So the other one has the disadvantage of the natural sign, being separated from the note by the stem. And if I tried putting the natural sign after the stem, it would make that F too far away. So this is a little ugly to me. And realistically, maybe this is the better choice here. Maybe this is the better choice. Yeah. When I first did this score in MuseScore 1.2, MuseScore had very terrible automatic spacing and handling of these multiple voices and stuff. And I was actually one of the people who worked to improve that back at MuseScore 2 and then some more in MuseScore 3. So I think in MuseScore 1, I probably had to manually position all that stuff. It didn't automatically do this stuff. So yeah, so I'm of mixed opinion on which of these is better, and I don't have a clear answer for you. There's a lot of subjectivity in these engraving decisions here. A lot of subjectivity. All right, let's talk about now clef changes. Since we saw that there was a clef change. Normally, and here's a thing that's not just piano music, but piano music has probably more clef changes than any other instrument. I think that's probably a pretty safe thing to say. Normally, clef changes go at the beginning of a measure, and you do that by selecting a measure, opening your clefs palette, and adding the clef change. So if I want to change to treble clef, I do it at the measure, and it will therefore appear before the bar line. MuseScore knows to do that automatically. Clef changes that apply to a full measure will automatically move before the bar line. That is the thing to do when in doubt. But, it's not always that clear. If we look back to Reunion here, the actual clef change that I needed to happen was mid-measure, because I needed the first beat to play in bass clef, then to play these descending chords that went a little too high for bass clef. I mean, I could have written that in bass clef without the clef change, but frankly, the goal was to show off MuseScore features, so I wanted to show off a clef change. So normally if you select a measure and then click your palette, the clef change appears before the bar line, which is correct. But if you need it to appear like it was there was a G in the lower octave, Shift D, Shift A, and then we want our chord to be up here, and we look at it and go, yeah, that's too high for bass clef. We want it in treble clef. You're going to select the note and then click the clef. And now MuseScore knows to insert the clef mid-measure. So normally clef changes, when you can get away with it, you apply it to the whole measure and it shows before the bar line. But if you've got a passage where you need to change clefs within the measure, by all means, you do that, and that's how it's handled in MuseScore. And if you flip back over to Reunion, you'll see that it changes back to bass clef going into the next measure, and the clef change, as always, appears before the bar line. So you get to see it at the end of one system before going to the next system. That's how clef changes work. The same is true for time signature changes or key signature changes, by the way. If it changes at the start of a new key signature, at the start of a new system, there will be what is called a courtesy change that will show at the end of the previous system. MuseScore handles all that automatically. So unless you have a really special exception and you're an expert in music engraving and know what you're doing, you should never mess with those defaults, because they are correct 99% of the time. So let's also look at this arpeggio symbol, right? That arpeggio symbol is another thing. And as I'm looking at it here, I see how we can improve this here, because again, MuseScore 1, when I originally did this, didn't support something that we can fake better now. It's still not completely supported in MuseScore 4. Someday I'm sure it will be. But what's happening here is I've got a two-handed chord, 3 notes left hand, 3 notes right hand, and the arpeggio symbol means that. Roll the chord. That's all over harp music too, of course. So, and also guitar music. It's a strum. So this means to do that, and I'm having to do that here by putting a separate arpeggio symbol on the left hand and the right hand, but MuseScore does allow you to create an arpeggio symbol that extends across both staves. It's kind of weird and janky how it works, and it's not going to play back correctly, but it's better than nothing. So let me show you that. So first, if I just want to add an arpeggio to this chord, I select the chord or any note in it, go to the Arpeggios and Glissandi palette, and click my arpeggio symbol. And there's my arpeggio. And then if I add in the top staff that other chord, which was B flat, D, and G, and I'll just let it be bass clef because sure, why not? I can do the same here, select a note in that chord and click the arpeggio symbol, and it adds the arpeggio to that chord. So this is basically how it is. Let me just go ahead and change that to treble clef. I'll do it before the bar. Select the bar, click the treble clef. There we go. So now it looks more like the other version. So this is how I had it in MuseScore originally. I had it as separate arpeggio symbols because that was the best you could do in MuseScore 1. Well, somewhere around MuseScore 3, we implemented a half solution to this, because really you just want the entire arpeggio symbol to extend across both staves. So here's what you can do. I'm going to get rid of the one on the bottom staff. I'm going to select that arpeggio marking on the top staff, and I'm going to press Shift down. No? Oh, I have to select the handle. Sorry. I have to select the bottom handle and press Shift down. Let me press Control R to reset that thing. Actually, let me just delete it and do it again because I messed up. So enter the arpeggio symbol, select the arpeggio symbol, but make sure in particular that that bottom handle is selected. And you'll see the little dotted line connecting it to the bottom note. Now when I press Shift down, it automatically extends to the bottom staff. It's still gonna not play back correctly. Let's hear it. Now, that was hard to really tell. Let's hear. Yeah, I don't even know what it did. I think it played the bottom staff all three together and only arpeggiated the top ones. I'd have to slow it down more and think about what it did. Whatever it did, it wasn't what I wanted, but that's okay. At least I can get it to look right, and that's what I care about here. So that's another little bit of cross-staffness for you. That Shift down shortcut, by the way, you might think, well, gee, that's obscure and not obvious, which is true. It is absolutely true, but it's consistent with how a lot of other things work in MuseScore. For instance, if I add a line from the palettes, let's go to, say, open the keyboard palette and add a pedal. If let me zoom back out so I can see what I'm doing better. If I add one of these pedal lines to that measure, and then I decide, hey, I want to extend that pedal line longer, the way you're going to do it is by selecting it and using Shift right, which extends it one note at a time, or one whatever at a time. So Shift plus the cursor keys is in general the way to extend lines, or Shift right to make it longer, Shift left to make it shorter. So so most lines are horizontal, so it's Shift left and Shift right. Arpeggios just happen to be the only kind of line that's really vertical, and so Shift down is how you do that. So the question is how to get there with keyboard only to that handle, and the answer is I'm not sure, but let's find out. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click in the palette to get the arpeggio sign in there. When I do that, what I see is that the 55555, was that just a cat walking across your keyboard, Marla, or are you telling me about 5? I'm curious. Okay, so the arpeggio sign here is selected, but the handle isn't there. So let's see if by keyboard I can get there. So what I'm going to guess right now is if I hit Alt right, it moves to the next rest. Let me hit Alt left. Alt left has now moved back to the arpeggio sign and the top handle is selected. At that point, let me try pressing tab. I don't have high hopes. Yeah, tab actually did work. So with the arpeggio selected, tab will move you between the handles. Now the trick is, how will you know which handle is selected if all you've got to go is screen reader feedback? And I don't know. So, but I will tell you that that worked. With that arpeggio selected, I first used Alt right to move off of it and then Alt left to move back onto it. That pre-selected the top handle, and then tab selected the bottom handle, and now shift down works. So if you can trust that that's going to work, it does. But yeah, a lot of these kinds of adjustments are frankly just going to be tricky to do using keyboard and screen reader only, because you won't necessarily have the feedback you want. So now there's a great observation here about clef changes before the measure versus not, and it's worth making. MuseScore 3 operated on the assumption that you might sometimes want that clef change to be after the bar line, which is almost never correct. In other words, if I have 4 notes, let me enter for more reasonable notes. If I have 4 notes here and I select the first note of the measure, remember, if I select, say, the second note of the measure and then add a clef change to the second note, it will gladly do it mid-measure. In MuseScore 4, if you select the first note of the measure and add the clef change, it does the musically correct thing, which is to move that clef change before the bar line. MuseScore 3 wasn't that smart. MuseScore 3 said, oh, you've selected a note instead of a measure. I guess you want that clef change in front of the note, which is wrong. It's just wrong to have the clef change immediately after the bar line. There's essentially next to no musically correct reason to do that. There's no like situation. And that used to drive the professional engraver who did a lot of the work on the changes in MuseScore 4. It used to drive him crazy, would be the number of incorrectly engraved scores he would see that people had created in MuseScore 3 where the clef was appearing after the bar line. And it's because people were clicking the first note instead of clicking the measure before applying the clef change. Well, you're not supposed to have to know details like that. I mean, MuseScore should just do the right thing. So as of 4. I don't know if it just started in 4.1 or if it happened in 4.02 or what, but somewhere within the last few months, they finally implemented it where MuseScore will do the right thing. It'll put that clef change before the bar line. There might be a way to trick it into showing up after. I think, let me try control clicking it. No, that doesn't do it. I think there's some silly, funny, special, tricky way of forcing it after the bar line. Like if you're trying to produce a manual on how not to notate things, you know, it's important to be able to do things like that. But I think what you would just do is add it as a symbol. So anyhow, that's a good observation about these things. So in MuseScore 3, then, if you want the clef before the bar line, bottom line is make sure you select the measure instead of the first note. Because if you select the first note, it will go after the bar line. So make sure you select the measure. Selecting the measures, you know, generally what I would recommend anyhow. Okay, so I wanted to talk about these various different things, and I'm glad that people are asking questions and bringing up things that you're interested in, because that helps me know what to be talking about. There's something else I want to show you here, and I'm going to flip over to something that's not pretty at all. And what this is MuseScore's attempt, and I use the word attempt pretty loosely here, at notating a MIDI file. This is obviously a completely unreadable mess. I mean, obviously, if you're seeing the screen right now. But let's listen to this thing. So that's not a particularly complicated piano part. But the problem is, if you try recording a MIDI file and then importing it into MuseScore, MuseScore is going to have to guess about a whole lot of things that you don't want it guessing about. So it's going to have to guess which staff to place the notes on, because nothing about the MIDI file that you recorded says this note was played in the left hand, this was played in the right hand, or I want this on the top staff, or I want this on the bottom staff, or I think you should use treble clef for this note, or I think you should use bass clef for this note. None of that stuff is recorded in the MIDI file. So MuseScore is going to try to guess about things like that, and it's going to guess badly way too often, because this stuff requires human intelligence. AI isn't quite to the point. And actually the AI, this is technically AI what's going on. It was implemented for MuseScore 2 as part of a Google Summer of Code project, like almost 10 years ago. And it does an okay job sometimes, but it's going to fail miserably sometimes. So what we're going to do is enter this passage. And so this is actually my brother Mike's sample MIDI track for his song Rise Up and Shine for the first measure. So first, let's sort out what's actually going on in that first bar to understand how it's supposed to be, what went wrong, and how we want to fix it. All right? Because trying to fix it by actually taking these notes and moving them into other voices and trying to move them onto the other staff, I'm going to tell you right now, not worth the effort. It's going to fail miserably enough that you just don't. It's going to be harder. I shouldn't say fail miserably enough. It's going to be way harder to try to fix this than to just re-enter it. So we're going to study what's there, and then I'm going to re-enter it, and it's going to be simpler. All right, so I'm going to now sort out what's going on here. Left hand on the low F, right hand on this chord, right? So we have that on beat 1, and then the left hand on the and of 1 comes in with the C, and then something comes in with that F. MuseScore has decided to put it on the top staff, but I think it's more logical to assume that that whole passage, the F, C, and F up here, should probably all be left hand. And then, so we have that, and that's on 2. And then on the and of 2, we have a chord. We have a C and an F and an A. Well, to me, that could all be right hand. Left hand could be that. Right hand can be that. Right? That's actually pretty dang simple. So the right hand goes bum, bum, and the left hand goes bum, bum, bum. That's it for the beginning of that measure. Part of what made this look as horrific as it does is, well, a lot of things go, because again, artificial intelligence is what it is. But there's things going on here that are complicating things greatly. Like, check out this A here. This A is held less long than that F and that C, and it is notated as such. MuseScore is trying to literally notate, oh, you held on to the F longer, you held on to the C less long, and you held on to the A even less long, because that's how it actually got played. Fingers don't come off the keys at precisely the same time. So merely quantizing this in a MIDI, like if you recorded this, I think Mike recorded it in, I don't even know what he uses for recording MIDI files, some sort of DAW or sequencer. You can quantize within that software before importing that MIDI file, and it will average out these it'll decide, hey, let's make these all a quarter note, but that's not necessarily right either. So so anyhow, that's why we have multiple voices here, because the F is held longer, the C is held less long, the A less long still. That's 3 different rhythms as far as music notation is concerned. But logically, no need for that in the world. There's no logical reason that should have been notated that way, other than that's how the fingers happen to come off the keys. So I'm going to flip over to my score and try to enter that thing a little better right now. So what I saw was the right hand played F, C, and F. Left hand played eighth notes, F. Oops, I want to be back in bass clef. Let's change back to bass clef. So not this F, but that F. And then a C, and then an F. And I'll call it a quarter note for now. Right? Oh, Michael, that's brilliant. So Michael's saying a keyboard with conductive keys and special gloves so you can sort out which hand is doing which. Man, that's brilliant. I mean, that's like feasible, right? I mean, there is no technical reason whatsoever. I mean, I just watched Apollo 13 last night, and by God, if they could get men back from the moon, from almost the moon, with nothing but slide rules and duct tape, they can make capacitive gloves for keyboard playing. Absolutely. Yeah, that's pretty brilliant. So I've got my left hand going F, C, F, and now my right hand needs to play that chord on the and of the beat. So I'll enter a rest first, and then we'll talk about that. It was C, F, A. And then that's basically this. We have the beginning of that notated now in a much clearer fashion. The issue is now there's a couple issues. So one is, notice we play the F in the right hand on beat 1, and then we need to play it again in the left hand on beat 2. Well, that means the right hand can't be holding that F for any more than right? It can't hold it while it can't hold it. You know, I can't have a dotted quarter note here. If I put a dotted quarter note on beat 1, then my left hand cannot play that F on beat 2 because my right hand is still holding it, right? Now, in reality, if you write that, someone's going to be smart enough and they'll take their hand off the F early and play it here and then silently curse you for writing something that's not playable as is. So there's a couple of things that I'm going to suggest because this sort of thing comes up all the time in piano music. I want to give you some practical advice on handling this. Here's my advice. Well, advice number 1, don't write the F because who needs it? We've already got 2 Fs here. Do we need a third F? No. For that matter, why not change it to an A? Because then I can get a full triad. I like that a lot better. So if it were me writing this piece, that's what I would do. It would be that. Bum, bum. So now I don't have any more overlap issues. So if you're writing for piano, that's something you think about, how to arrange in such a ways that your fingers aren't having to do each other's jobs, that one finger doesn't need to play one note while another one is still sustaining it, and that maybe that one of the two could be on a different note. Yeah, or you could change the rhythm or whatever. So that is a really good solution there. Here's another one, though. If you decided, no, I don't want the third on that chord. I want the sound of just the open fifth. And I don't want to bring the third in until the mid measure. That's a valid choice. Here's what I would do. I would remove the A. Okay, so originally we had that F, right? It was down here. And I made that observation that if I play that F, it's still sustained here. But what if, instead of notating it there, what if I notate it here in the bass clef? Now it's clear that the F is no longer being sustained when we get to beat 2 there. So that would be completely legitimate. You know, I'm not crazy necessarily about it. Let me get that right hand now into treble clef because I think that's going to be smarter. So here's the other thing. I have a choice here. If I am going to play that F in the right hand, I have a choice. Would I rather see that F notated below the staff, or would I rather see the A? Like if I play this chord here F, C, F. In treble clef, that F is several ledger lines below. But if I do that whole measure in, so that's what I have right now, right? If I enter, let me put that F back here. I have this in bass clef, and I have to read this A way above the staff. If I change it to treble clef, now I have to read the F way below the staff. So one possibility would be to have it in bass clef, but have that mid-measure clef change, right? That is absolutely a thing. But I'm going to tell you right now, no, don't do that. That feels unnecessary. I don't want to see the A above the staff. That's too high. But the F below the staff is not. So I'd rather just see that whole measure in treble clef. This measure, if we're going to include that low F, if we're going to include that low F, I would say this is the way to do it, because I don't have a problem reading that F. It's only 3 ledger lines below. That's kind of the limit for this. So writing F in the right hand treble clef 3 ledger lines below is common. We see it every day. Writing that A 3 ledger lines and a space above the staff, much less common, especially for the top staff. So don't do it. So this is how I want it. But again, I think I'm going to get rid of that F. So now I have this. So I'm technically speaking not holding that F as long. But here's the other thing. Mike played this, or at least recorded it, or it imported without pedal. But realistically, a pianist playing these sort of arpeggiated figures is going to use the damper pedal so that these things sustain. Notice what he did here in his version. He actually has that F sustained and then the C sustained, right? And so these notes are literally written to sustain. But if you're gonna play with pedal, you don't have to do that, right? If I just put a pedal marking on this, it's gonna sustain anyhow. So let me just quickly add a pedal marking. I'll go ahead and add the cool modern style of pedal marking. Oh, it's so far below because of this other one here. Notice MuseScore has aligned those pedal markings automatically, which is cool. But that's why this one was so far below the staff, because the one in the first measure needed to be. So, yeah, if I write it this way, it's going to sustain anyhow, even though my hands aren't on the keys anymore. So that's totally valid. But if you want to show the sustain, you don't have to do it with the multiple voices. So this was done by MuseScore automatically, because Mike played, he held the F, then played the C, held the C, played the F, and played the F, then the C, and then the F, and sustained them all. I want to show you that you can notate that without, and that required multiple voices, a long note, and then a note that comes in after a rest, and then another that came in after a rest. You would need multiple voices for that, but there's a nice simple notation for that you want to know, and it looks like this. I don't know that it has a name, but I think of it as they're broken tie, not broken ties. They're I basically have written this arpeggio. Let me get rid of that top F for now. I have this arpeggio written, and then I have the full chord written, and all I got to do now is select that arpeggio, press T for tie, and look what it does. It automatically ties each note in that arpeggio to its corresponding note in the next chord. That arpeggio and hold, maybe I'll flip that. Whoops, what did I do? Let me flip that F up. I'm just trying to get the stems to not cross the ties. That type of notation is super common in piano music, arpeggio and hold. And that's a perfectly valid way of notating it. But again, you don't even need to do that if you're going to be using pedal. So anyhow, that's a whole bunch of things that I've talked about here. Yeah, like I said, I've talked about piano music a lot, and I talk about a lot of basic things here and there. And I've got a whole tutorial on piano music in the course that you can check out at the end of the Mastering MuseScore 4 course. There's a piano tutorial, but I wanted to cover some things that I knew were relevant, especially for people who are working on their piano accompaniment for Rise Up and Shine. So I wanted to make sure that you saw some good techniques that I knew would come in handy. So there you go. So Michael, I guess I answered your question. So glad to hear it. And I would say then mission accomplished. And let's get back to our MuseScore theme music. So thanks everyone for the being here. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for the questions and the discussion. And I definitely look forward to talking more to you tomorrow about the piece and the Rise Up and Shine piece and how we're going to create piano accompaniment for it. If you've already checked out the lesson I posted, for those of you who are in the cohort space, either because you're gold members or were previously in the theory cohort, great. So yeah, we'll be looking at that in more detail and looking at different ways, not just how to notate Mike's part, but how to create our own parts for that. So that's what we'll be looking at tomorrow. Next week will be the first Wednesday of the month. So it'll be an Ask Me Anything session. And so, be thinking about questions you might want to ask and, just be ready to ask them during the session. And we'll go from there. Next week, we'll probably wrap up also the PVG project on Rise Up and Shine, and then get ready to start a new project. Next, I want to have a little study group on Braille. So we're going to do that as a project, and we'll do miscellaneous other things during Music Masterclass. So lots of things to look forward to. And then in the fall, we'll do a cohort of the Harmony and Chord Progressions course. So hope people found some useful things in here, and thanks again. See you next time.